Welcome back to Outside Views. And yes, once again, we need to talk. Because Brexit still is sneaking in everywhere into a lot of topics that are currently happening. Although everybody would say, oh, Brexit happened so long ago and that's all done. Besides the fact that it's not all done because we still have some transitional periods running, there's always still new consequences of that. You remember everybody said Britain will have the freedom of making their own rules, and also, especially Boris Johnson at the time of the climate conference said, we will be a global leader in protecting the planet. Well, today we have the results of that promise. And it's kind of a tragic reversal of that. And there's one more thing I need to read out because I don't want to quote that wrong. A new analysis from the Institute for European Environmental Policy and The Guardian has found that the UK is not only failing to keep pace with the EU on environmental rules, it's actively going backwards. And let me repeat that one. They are not just lagging behind, they are regressing. And the numbers are stunning. Since Brexit, the EU has brought forward 28 new or upgraded pieces of environmental legislation that the UK has not adopted. Obviously, they can now decide if they want to do the same as the EU does or if they want to do something different, but it gets worse. The UK has actively chosen to weaken 4 different pieces of legislation that were inherited from the EU. And so we're not talking about, oh yeah, that's because they're not in the EU, they don't have the 28 ones. They have weakened 4 of them, and I talked about some water quality stuff, etc. in the past already. But now they have weakened another 4, and that's not a mistake or anything, or just the natural divergence because they're not taking rules from Brussels anymore. That was a political choice to weaken that stuff. And they always said they want to be a global leader in protecting the planet. They have one example in that's the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. And this is the legislation that's being sold as a way to unlock the building of homes and to cut red tape and whatever. But what it actually does, it overrides the EU's Habitats Directive. And that directive was there to protect creatures like, is it dormice? Never heard of those, and I have a zoo channel, so it's nothing too exotic. Although I learned that while I was doing the zoo channel that you have muntjacs in Britain because someone brought them there, and now you have tons of those. But there are also red squirrels and nightingales that were protected like that. And I know how really annoying that can be when we want to build something here, and you know that I'm a local politician that has to do with a lot of that building stuff. It can really be annoying because you want to build there and then they find one of those animals living there. But there are different solutions, by the way. We have one in a different district, not mine, but there's a building project. They are relocating those animals to a new home, and so everything will be fine. But this new directive would just mean they just pay into a fund and then build there, and it's kind of a license to destroy biodiversity and nature without thinking about it. Of course, it's annoying that first you have to relocate animals here before you can build in a certain place. If you have places, you can relocate them. That's, of course, the prerequisite for that. But it's doable. It's annoying, but doable. And as long as you don't exaggerate all that stuff. But cutting that completely down, and that's just one example of the regression, because there's a lot more going on. And as I mentioned a lot of times before, the UK is more and more falling behind on water policy. And we are, in the EU, we have more and more stricter legislation to clean rivers of chemicals and microplastics. And the UK has removed a lot of stuff. And they even removed EU air pollution laws from the statutes book because the EU, while the EU is going even tougher on this one. But it's also the same if you want to always say, yeah, those animals, what do I have to do with them? Or the air, I don't have any problem with our air, so why should we go stricter here? But in the EU, it's also touching stuff that you are dealing with, because products in the EU are now getting more recyclable, which is a very important part of protecting the nature, and more energy efficient. And those are, we would say in a German proverb, those are screws that you can adjust to make things better without too big of a hassle. But in the UK, I don't hear anything about this, about the progress here. So if I overlooked something, please teach me in the comments below the video. But I'm not seeing any progress there in the UK, in especially water. Leave that, but it's kind of, there's stuff coming in. It's also customer protection, because there's now a lot of stuff that is not allowed to be shipped to the EU anymore, but it just can be, the UK, to say it really mean, would be the dumping ground from the point of the EU for substandard, hard to recycle products that can no longer be sold here where I'm living. And is that what you want in the UK? I don't think so, because this is definitely, in case of environmental standards, although promised by the UK, this is not a race to the top. At the moment, this is rather a race to the bottom, and that cannot be what every one of you wants here. The government, of course, says there are bright spots here, because, for example, we had the discussion about the UK banning the sand eel fishing, and that helps puffins from starving. But it also has created more marine protected areas than the EU has, and in the end, the sand eel, those are some token gestures. They are small. Some small wins that overshadow the bigger problem, because they could say we saved the sand eels, but the bigger problem is that in the places where it's far more important, the UK is going backwards in the end and not forward, and you will see even more developments there that are not really nice. The point is that this is happening under a Labour government. I mean, we know what they have in their manifesto. And in their manifesto, they promised that they would not weaken environmental protections. First of all, they weakened it in 4 cases now. And secondly, not doing anything with a progressive world or progressing world that is weakening. So in this case, they are not following their manifesto. And they even have ignored warnings from the Office for Environmental Protection, the very watchdog that was set up after Brexit to replace EU oversight. The Office for Environmental Protection was introduced to replace the EU watchdog we have for stuff like that. And that watchdog is warning the government, and the government does not listen. And so that cannot be the end of it. And it's not about the Conservative Party or the Labour Party, although especially from the Labour Party with a manifesto like that, you would have expected something else. But it's a little bit more about a political establishment that really is compromising on fundamental stuff to achieve short-term economic goals. We have seen this with the Tories, where I, as a German conservative, criticized the Tories for that and a lot of other things after Brexit. But Labour is doing nothing different. They are sacrificing fundamental goals for short-term economic goals, maybe with the current polls giving them panic for political goals. I don't know. But in this case, I really have to say they play politics, and they are playing with the future of the country. The EU is not a nirvana. I'm not saying that the EU is doing everything correctly and the Brits are the bad guys. No, I'm just talking about what I can see. The EU is overdoing things in some places, and that's what I'm criticizing. I have a lot to do with campaigning at the moment, but and that takes up, especially as a volunteer politician. Yeah, I do have to do that in my spare time, and so I really have to juggle around with my work a bit. So I will talk about a lot of things on my EU channel again when this is over, and I do criticize when they are overdoing things. What I hate from every government is micromanaging, and that's what the EU does in some places. But they are at least doing something. You can make mistakes when you do something, but doing nothing or even undoing things cannot be the solution here. But I'm really looking forward to your comments on this one. And if you want to see another video right now, the next one is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.